With visual effects compositing, one of the tricks we use to integrate a blue screen or green screen into an environment is a thing called edge wrap. Now, edge wrap basically takes that background, it blurs it, it pulls some of that color a little bit over your extraction, and just helps it sit into the plate a little bit better. But until now, we've had to do that in post-production. So you do that in After Effects or Fusion or Nuke or something like that. But since I'm doing offline virtual production, I like to pre-extract my blue screen, green screen, and then put that on a media texture inside of Unreal Engine so you can see it into the environment, you get all the advantages like fog and all those sort of things. It's brilliant. But one thing that I've not been able to do is edge wrap. But now I've got a way of doing it, and I'm going to show you how to do that in this video so you can put it in your films. Okay, so in this video, I've made timestamps because I'm going to go over some of the things again that I've done in my other videos, but I've got updates and improvements. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the blue screen, green screen, and then do an extraction. And then I'm going to show you how to make that utility pass for doing the edge wrap itself. And so it uses some blurs and some stencil nodes and things like that. And then I'm going to show you what that would do in regular traditional 2D type comp. So when you blur the background and then you put your character over it and then you edge wrap that, how we'd normally do it. And I want to kind of move that process into the engine rather than doing it in post, because I like to do everything that I can from the comp world inside the engine because it's great fun. Okay, so I'm going to show you that. Then I'll go over, in this case, I've got a bigger slider. Woo! So I've got a longer slider so I can do bigger moves. I'm going to show you that the way I do my camera tracking again. So if you don't have a camera move, then just skip that bit and then go to the next bit where I import that into the engine, and then I'll show you again how I make my media texture, but then I'll show you how I make my sub part of that media texture material that will have that edge wrap kind of built into it. And then the magic, the kind of special sauce, is how do you blur the background as its own 2D texture sample to then use that edge wrap to kind of pull through. So that's your hook, that's the bit that's going to keep you riveted to your seat. We can use the timestamps and skip to that bit until we get to that bit. So let's get on with it and I'll show you my process. Okay, so we're inside of DaVinci Fusion in the Fusion page, and I brought in my clip and we're looking at the green screen now. All right, it's not a green screen, it's a blue screen. But as I said, everyone Googles green screen, and so I lied. A terrible, terrible man. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of my blue screen extraction. It's pretty much the same as my other videos, except I do some little bits at the end with the color space, which I'll get into. And then at this point here, this is what I use to create the edge wrap matte, which we then use in Engine to kind of pull some of that light wrap over our extraction, but not over our background. Okay, so very quickly, we've got a green screen, blue screen, and then we've got a noise reduction. Just take the edge off this because in Engine, there's no noise in the actual renders, well, there shouldn't be. And so when you put your plate in, you want it to look the same in that it doesn't have noise in it or grain, and then you add that afterwards. So you either add it with a post-process volume in Engine, which I don't do. I add it inside the, I'm pointing to the color page. I put it in the color page there. Hello. Anyway, so we've got our green screen extraction, and this time I am using Ultra Keyer, and I will try different keyers whichever one gives me the best edge. And the way I kind of work is this part of my script here is basically what I use to pull the key. So if I press A and look at the alpha, so there's my alpha. And then this part of the script is what I do to my color. So then I combine them together here. So I use my alpha from this point on, and then I use my color from this point on. So, because if I was to use the final version here, then if you look at my alpha in this part, it's all fat and ugly, and it's got some ugly stuff because I'm doing all these kind of destructive additive things to the actual edge of my blue screen, green screen, and then So I use that color, the RGB value, and then I use the alpha here, and then combine them together to make a nice best of both worlds type extraction. Okay, so I'll go back into here. So I've got my alpha, and I've actually got two alphas going. So I've got two keyers going. So I've got one that gives me a good edge for this part, and then one that gives me a nicer, softer edge for this part. And then I combine them together here using this mat here. So I've got the best of both worlds. And often what I'll do with keys is I'll, do the hands separately. And in this case, I've done the shadow separately. And you build up a layer of different keys for different areas of your plate. Lovely. Okay, so there's my alpha stage. And now I'm going to extend some of these edges, those sort of things. And I'm using my clean plate trick. So you basically blur the plate, and then you bring that in with the clean plate, and it extends the edges. So this grows the edges, and then that's what that part does. And then this part here is basically blurring the plate and blurring the alpha, and then I'm eroding. I'm just going to go to the alpha mode, press A to go into alpha. So press 2 to see my blur, and then I'm eroding it to extending it, just growing it, and then I'm blurring this, and then I'm doing a stencil between this smaller version, this bigger version, to give me that edge area. And then I'm basically bringing in that clean plate over my original color just to get, so there's my clean plate, there's my alpha, and then just putting that over that edge just to retain a bit more of that that edge without being too destructive, because the clean plate kind of eats in a bit too much sometimes. So that's why I'm doing that. Then I've got a color curves, which takes out it's my blue suppression stuff. And then I've got this magic thing here, which is my color space transform, which I'll go over in a second. And then I've got a sharpen here. And so I've got all of that result. And then I use that as my foreground. And then that alpha is my alpha, and then I put it over a transparent background. So then I've got basically a nice extraction. I'm just going to pipe this to here so it doesn't look too weird. So I'm just going to like that. So now I've got my extraction over my background with my alpha. So that's great. And then what I would do is pipe that out as a DWAA EXR sequence into Unreal Engine. Now, I've changed my process a little bit, because here I've got a color space transform. So this is what I used to do. And I would then bring that into Engine, and then I would use a material instance with the MF chroma keyer, which has a color corrector built into it. So then you can change your gamma and your gain and your colors and all those sort of things, which I still do, but this gets me a lot closer. And this is thanks to someone in the comments. So this was DeRoche, who basically said, why don't you put a color space transform in and then do this? And I was like, I was kind of trying to keep it round trippy so I didn't have to touch anything. And in the end, I was like, let's just try it, see if it works. And it was like, that's a really good idea. And I really like it now. So I've changed my process, my pipeline to incorporate this. So thank you, DeRoche, for leaving that comment. And to anyone who leaves comments, thank you very much. I need your support and your help to kind of improve this. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a color space transform. And the reason why is currently we're looking at our diffusion page in, I don't know what the correct color space world gamut thing is that it looks at, but I know that there's a LUT up here. So this little window here is your LUTs. And I know that inside of Unreal Engine, it is using linear to sRGB. So the actual internal mechanics of the color space, so I'm sure somebody from Unreal will go, that's not how it works. But I think the internal kind of color space is working in a linear color space, and it's kind of tone mapping it to sRGB. So, or whatever. But if you basically turn on linear to sRGB on, this is how it will look. Whatever you've got, how it will look inside of Unreal Engine. And this is pretty much what it would look like before. So I take this, and then inside of my color corrector, I would effectively add like a gamma and a gain, and then kind of pull this around to make it look, kind of a bit more in the sort of color spacey sort of world that, like kind of bad version, but effectively do that with the gain and the gamma to kind of make it sit in. And then, but now with this color space, let's go and reset these. Just press that one there and that one there. There we go. Turn that off. Now I add a color space transform. So if I look at the color space transform, I change my input color space to Blackmagic Design 4.6 Film Gen 3 and my input gamma to Blackmagic Design Film Gamma. And this now is how it looks without the edges inside of Unreal Engine. So that's great. And then I've still got the control with the color corrector, the MF underscore chroma key color corrector, so I can pull these around and adjust them too. But this makes it look a lot closer. Well, it makes it exactly like how I shot it. So that's awesome. And then I pipe this into here. So let me just pipe you into there like that. So now that is what this looks like inside of Unreal Engine, which is fantastic. So thank you for the help, DeRoche. And talking about help, I also want to thank Destination Moon for showing me the hotkeys to these guys. Because before I was like, wait, how do I quickly toggle between my red, green, blue, and alpha and that? And it's really simple. It was just the same hotkeys as in Nuke. And it's just A to get your alpha, R for your red, green, and blue, and alpha. So thank you, Destination Moon. Thank you. Appreciate that. Right, great. So now I've got my color value and my alpha, and I've put it over a blank background. And so to make a blank background, you basically just grab one of these background nodes, and it comes in as RGBA, whatever, and you make the alpha black like that. And you also make sure that your image size is set to whatever your video size is, your extraction, which is this one was 4.6K or something like that. And then there's my result over that. And then one thing I did notice, I won't zoom in, but it's 4608 by 2592, which is the Ursa Mini's kind of default sensor size thing. But Unreal Engine was having problems sort of playback and kind of memory issues with that size. So I put a resize node in here to 3840 by 2160, and that's fixed it. I could just crop in as well, and that way I would retain the same sharpness, but I didn't think of that until right now. No, I just couldn't be bothered because my delivery is like 2K. It's HD res, so it doesn't really matter. One thing I've got here, this little node here, is just a test that I do over a color background. So like rather than, because sometimes it's hard to judge how your edges are working over these sort of backgrounds. You're like, is that any good? Does that work? So what I do is I just do a duplicate one of these. So the alpha and then the foreground over a background, but I make that background a color. And so it's just a color, and I pull that around to kind of see if I'm getting any issues at certain colors, because certain colors, it'll look fine at this one and it will look terrible at a brighter one. So you can kind of just catch things, and just gives you a bit more of a little bit more of an idea how it's going to work in the actual comp in Engine. And again, the great thing is you can just rewrite these frames. You bring it into Unreal, you start noticing, oh man, that shadow is really bad. And then you can just come back in here, adjust this and rerun it over your background. Rerun your DWA EXRs, and it'll update, because with the image media sequence, it's looking at the actual files on the disk. It's not bringing them into the actual content directory or anything like that. So you don't have to copy things in and reload them. It's actually, because they're so big, it leaves them in the disk area. So then you can point to those frames, and if you overwrite them, it'll just update in Engine straight away, which is great. But also it's kind of dangerous because you can overwrite things. So be careful with your saver nodes. Great, so that's this part. So that's our extraction. And now if you're just joining me in the timestamps, so we're where we used to be, except for that little bit about here, which will be our secret. And to anyone that's just sat through this last part. All right, was adding the color space transform. So I'm exporting these as linear sRGB. Okay, and I've got a resize node, so it's now at UHD resolution. Okay, so this makes our extraction. And then this part of the script is for our utility pass. Ooh. So what we have here is a bunch of mats, effectively, which I'm going to use to edge wrap. So I'm going to blur the background in Unreal and then pull some of that blur over the edge of my extraction, and that helps sit it in. And then I'll put bloom over everything, and that will kind of mush it all together as well. But there'll be kind of nice kind of balancing kind of levels. Now I've got a red, green and blue. So I've got R, G, B, A. So I've got different levels of this edge wrap. And the reason is because Unreal Engine with its EXRs only likes to read in red, green, blue and alpha. Now, multi-channel EXRs is what you'd use in your compy world. So you'd have a different kind of render passes and things like that baked into them, like your AOVs and different crypto mats and all sorts of things. So you can have a multi-channel EXR, and they become huge and they're great. We use them all the time. But in Unreal Engine, they need speed and they only support RGBA. So I can't bring in just an R or a G or a B or an A on its own as an image sequence. I have to bring in 4-channel EXR. So since I've got 3 extra channels, I can put other things into them. And in this case, I'm putting in different values of the edge wrap, but I could say do one for subsurface scattering level, or a matte for, is pants or something. I don't know. You've got 4 extra channels, so you may as well play with them. So what I did in this case is I made one for the alpha, and then I did different ones for different levels. And I'll show you how I made this stencil. So I've basically got my alpha here. So there's my alpha, and I blurred it by 25 pixels. And then I did a merge node, and I changed the merge to a stencil, so it gave us this, which is great. And then I pipe that into the alpha. Well, actually, yeah, I pipe it into the alpha of this channel. And then I've got another one here, and I've changed the blur value of this to 11. And so it's a small one. And then I've got another one here, and I've changed the blur again to whatever it is, littler, 4.5. And then I've got one down here, which is very small. But you can still see it's still wrapping over, which is great. So now I've just piped those into a multi-merge. So I'm piping the alpha into the alpha, and then the red into the red, and the alpha of this one becomes the red channel, the alpha of this one becomes the green, and the alpha of that one becomes the blue. So I'm using a channel boolean, and you can see here I've used a copy operation, and I've set these default to whatever they are, like alpha or foreground, or red foreground, green foreground, or whatever it is. But you just go in here and you can find the black or white. There's lots of other things here. And a quick way of doing it, you press that, and then you type in BLE, and it will hop to, I'm pointing, it'll hop to it, computer, second monitor, camera, B camera. It'll hop to your, whatever you type in, like that. So I've got copy, black, 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 and then alpha is the alpha, because that's pointing into there. And then this one now, this channel, I've made this one the red, the red channel. And then this one, I popped it into the green and the blue. And then you can see here, like that one's now blue is alpha foreground, green, alpha foreground, blah, blah, blah. And then just add a multi-merge at the end. That's this node here, that one there, grab that. And then you just pipe them all together, and it overs them all and makes it into an RGB multi-utility pass, I call it. So there we are. Now, at the moment, it's 3840 by 2160. And because, again, that's like, now you've got 8K's worth of video in your image media source files, and it's bringing all that into Unreal, and it's like hogging the memory. And I was like, I wonder if it has to be that size. And thankfully, it doesn't. So you can actually add a resize node after this. And I've made it half the size. So that's a quarter of the amount of data that it uses. And it still works, looks great, and it works. So that is really good that you can have these utility passes as different sizes, and you can kind of get away with as small as you want. And then this, again, is for offline virtual production. So it's for cinematics, offline virtual production, that kind of stuff where you're rendering using the movie render queue. I wouldn't use image media sequences, image media sources and EXRs for anything real time. I would use like an MP H.264 type or an H.265 type file where it plays much better, but it's not the sort of thing you want to scrub in your timeline and that kind of stuff. So that's if you're doing kind of real-time stuff, then just change all of this to movie files effectively, nice low-res H.264s. So I just want to show you now how I would do edge wrap in a traditional comp. So you take your background, you blur it, you put your extraction over that, and then you pull in some of that background on top and you add that in using that edge wrap matte. And then I'll show you how we're going to do that inside of Unreal, live inside of Unreal. Ooh, exciting. Okay, so I'm just going to make a background up and put this character over it for giggles. Be back in a moment. So I had a little play and I made a background image to put him in, and I made it with AI. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. It's quick, and so I apologise if this means something really terrible. But I just need a background with some contrast and bright light so you can kind of see roughly how you would do edge wrap or light wrap, as some people call it, in the olden days when you did post compositing outside of Unreal Engine. Okay, so I've got my background, there it is, and then I've got my foreground. Here we go, and then we're just putting him over the background here. So there he is, over the background, and traditionally what you'd like is some of this light wrapped around him. Now, if I did a glow, this is a glow which is kind of like a bloom. It's kind of adding some light wrap around the guy. But it's also adding it to the background as well. So often on my shots, I'll have a little bit. I'll have a touch which just blends everything together, which is great. But if you've got lots of atmospherics already in your shot, it's kind of add on top of those and that sort of stuff. So you just want to apply it to him, and that's why I'm doing this edge wrap matte for the character. So if we go back into our result, and then what we want to do is take this background, and then we blur it. So we want some of this light to bleed onto him using that matte here. So basically we do an A over B with that matte, and then I'm just going to mix that off, totally mix it off at the moment, but if we pull it on, so we're taking that blur with that matte and putting it on top of him. There we are. And then we put it over the environment. So now we've got that blurring. I'm going to knock it back a bit. So blurring, and we're just wrapping some of that over the character, and it just helps sit them in a bit more. And it's a bit too not wide enough there, so I'm just going to extend that a bit and then knock it back a bit like that. So there's a little bit of that light contamination around it, and it just helps sit them in. And then if I move them around, let's try and put them over here. He should take some of this blue color with him. Move it in the X. So now there we've got some of this blue kind of light blooming over him, and I'll make it stronger just so you can kind of see it. So let's just go like that. So we're going a bit crazy, not to taste. This is just for demonstrative purposes. And then I'm going to move him to the other side of the screen. So now he should be a bit more orangey. Too orangey for crows. Sorry. All right, and then there we go. And so that's how you would do it outside of Unreal Engine. And this is how, well, it's kind of really difficult to do in the way I have been doing it, because this element, since I'm rendering it in Engine, it's all combined as one piece. So I don't have a matte for my characters separate when I render in Engine. That's a big disadvantage. So that's why I try and pull these compy things into the engine so it's doing it all in one spot. And so that's why I've made this utility pass. And so we're going to bring this utility pass and effectively do the same thing in Engine. So that's what we're going to do now. So we're in Unreal Engine, and I've got a default level. So it was just File, New Level, and I deleted some of the bits I didn't need. And I've made a directory called Media, and I'm going to bring in our and make that media plate. And so we'll just do that sort of stuff. And again, this is stuff I did on my last video, but it's always fun to get a refresher, isn't it? So right mouse button, image media source, go into the media, and then image media source, IMS_extraction. So grab that one, double click on that, then go to sequence path and press those three little dots there, and then we will navigate to our extraction. And so you click on the, I think any frame, but I'm going to click on the first, and then hit open. And then to see it's in there, you just press open here on the top, and then it will play your extraction. Sometimes, and sometimes it will, and sometimes it won't. But there it is. So we've got it, and then you can drag your thing along here to make sure it's working. Look at that guy. Okay, and then I'm going to hit save. So part one is done. Okay, now next thing is I'm going to bring in the utility path. So I do the same thing. So go to media, image media source, IMS, call this utility. And these names are just totally optional, arbitrary, like that. And again, I've gone to the sequence path, click in the three little dots, go to my extraction utility, I've called it, and then open that one, hit there, so there it is. Cool, very fab, and hit save, close that. So now we've got our two image media sources, and now we're going to create media textures for those. I'll just do the image media extraction first. So right mouse button, and then we go back into media, and then we want to create a media player, and then we click on video output media texture asset, and you hit yes. So like that. So you got media player, so I call it MP, we'll call this extraction. And then MP extraction video is the media texture. I like to call it MT for media texture. And then I just like to call it the same name. There you are. Now, if I go into the media player extraction, double click on that, and then I tell it which piece to use. So I'm going to use the IMS extraction. Double click on that, and then hit save. So now this media player is going to play this media source, and that media player will send that source onto the this media texture, and then that media texture is what you feed into your material. So we're going to make a material now. So I'm going to go right mouse button, material, and then just hit material. So M for master material, I'm calling it extraction. Double click on that one, and now we've got our domain, and I'm going to make this from surface. Oh no, I want it a surface. It's the blend mode we're going to change. We're going to change the blend mode to, let's just do translucent. I do masked or I do translucent, and there's advantages and disadvantages with both, but for this case I'm just going to use translucent for now, and then I'll show you why I change it later in cases for and against. Okay, so we've got our material domain, which is a surface, and we've changed our blend mode to translucent. Now I'm going to bring in this media texture into here, and then I'm going to make that RGBA into our emissive, and I'm going to make my base color black. So double click on that and just make it black. So, or I can change it to unlit. Let's do that. So I'm going to change this from the shading model from default lit to unlit. So the reason is that I am using 100% of the actual extraction. I'm not casting any extra light onto it, and so any of the lights in the scene won't really affect it. And what I do is I light my scene to match my plate. So that way I'm not messing with the original colors of the actual the extraction of the plate and what was shot, because sometimes it'll just make it look odd, and so you kind of do the other way around. You keep your extraction as clean as possible, and then you change your lighting in your scene to match. That's my philosophy anyway. Just going to save that. And one thing I need to do is take the alpha and put it into the opacity. That. So now if I press this little flat plane there, we'll see the guy on there. And to see a different frame on here, it needs the media player to be pulling from the extraction images into the media player and putting those onto the media texture. It's complicated, and it should be simpler, but as you get more into it, you kind of understand why it does the way it does, because you can keep your media player the same and your media texture and just swap in different image media sources or image file sources, so you can kind of set up your shot and your cinematic with one image, And then if you want like really fast playback for in-game type playback, you can change to an image media file like an H.264 or something like that. But for what we're doing for cinematics and filmmaking, you want to keep it as an image media source. But that's part of the reason why it is a little bit more complicated than it kind of appears that it shouldn't be. All right, so I'm going to open up that media player and just point to the, double click on the extraction, and then I'm going to find a frame in here. And if I leave that open, let's just pause this. Now I go back into my extraction, it should update. So it's updated to that frame. Like that. So if you go to media extraction, media player, and find a frame that you want to look at. And there you go. And then go back into extraction, then you can see that. And then this is just using the plane as the image reference. So there we go. So that's great. Now let me make this big just to show you the thing that you can do. Now I did a little video about why you're getting dark edges, because this image is pre-multiplied and we need to unpre-multiply this image, and we add a divide node. Or if in this case, since we're using just a opacity and a, where's the domain? It's the translucent domain. I can actually change it to alpha composite pre-multiplied alpha. And if you use that one, it actually does that unpre-multiply in there. But the trouble with it is if I wanted to do a masked version, then I would use the opacity mask. And that one, there is no option to unpre-multiply it here. So you would have to add in the divide node. So I'll just show you. You extend that, add a divide, and then divide this image by the alpha, and then plug that into the emissive, and that gets rid of that's doing the same thing. It's unpre-multiplying it. It's taking all those little pixels as they get towards black, and it's dividing it by the alpha, which kind of like makes what little tiny trace of color there is kind of like more solid. So anyway, nerd alert. The other thing that I do is that I add a the MF underscore chroma key node here. So let's grab that, and then MF underscore chroma key, and then this has got a color corrector built into it, which is great. And so you can use that to kind of adjust your colors inside a material instance, which is something that I'll often do. So you've got different choices on how the transparency works. I'm going to change it back now just to translucent, just to mess with everyone. But I've got the option now because I've got the alpha fed into the opacity mask and the alpha fed into the opacity, and I've got a divide on. So now we've got all the kind of different options that we can use when we come to use the material instance. Whew. Okay, all right, so save this one, hit apply, and then kill that window. Now I am going to just grab a simple plane. There's my plane, and I'm now going to drag this media texture, my material, sorry, onto that plane, and there it is. So there's my video inside of here. Let's just rotate you around like that. And so at the moment, it's using that frame that it was parked on inside my media player. So the way to kind of update the media player is by putting a media track inside of a sequencer. So I'm going to set up a sequencer, and you just say a right mouse button and then level sequence, which is in cinematics, and create a level sequence, and I type LS for level sequence, and I'm just going to call this what should we call it? Light wrap, edge wrap, light wrap, edge wrap. Okay. Double click on that. So now I've got a sequencer. I basically need to make a media track. So you go up here to add, and then you say create a media track, and then you hit the plus button there, and we add a media source. So the IMS, image media source, and I've got two at the moment. So I'm going to use the IMS extraction. And now I was at frame 0. I'm going to change my frame rate to 24, and I'm at frame 0 when I did that. So now as I move this along, it's going to be looking at a different frame for every single frame in here, basically, because we've got a discrete frame for every frame, and it'll point to those frames in this media track. But we need to assign, by hitting the right mouse button, the media track. So you go to right mouse button, properties, and then you hit the media source. I mean, we've got that one. So that's what we just connected it to. But we now have to tell it the media texture that we're using. Oof. And we're going to use this one, the media texture. So now it's going to feed this image media source into that media texture, and that's going to use that on the media player. And it's like, all right, whatever. So now if I drag this along, the animation will update, and that's great. So that's really good. And then he's just on a little plane here. And then one of the things I do just to get the aspect ratio correct is I multiply this by the aspect ratio by, so it's I use 1920 by 1080, 10.08, and then that should now make him the right aspect ratio. Why is there two of them? Oh, because I've got two planes. Why have I got two planes? I must have duplicated him. All right, it's late. I'm tired. Okay, so there's my footage. There's amazing actor. And then if I zoom out of this, I'm zooming out of here, and I'm just going to set my end frame to the end frame of this. So if I go, what is it? 1473, and I can drag it along like that, or you can go into this little playback options there and change it there. There's your start and end. Sometimes it press the playback range locked so that you're not accidentally dragging these points and moving them. So there is our media texture. A little segue is that this shot has got a camera move on it. I've got a nice cine slider 5-foot version now, so we can get a nice zoom like that. But I'm going to show you at the end of the video how I did the camera tracking as like a bonus, because otherwise it's going to be too long a pause, because I want to get to the Unreal stuff, and so do you. So you can go to that bit, watch that bit if you're really into the camera tracking part, because I've got some improvements about scale and reference and things like that, which I'll show you at the end. But you can come back now and see imagine we did all the camera tracking and it's all working, and then we're going to show you how to do the edge wrap thing, because that's exciting. All right, so to the edge wrap part. Okay. Wibbly, wibbly, wibbly. We're back in, and we've got our FBX camera with the media plate attached to it, and that way it feels like it's locked to the ground. But if you're doing a locked camera, then you didn't need to know any of that, because this works with any sort of camera. So at this point, now we're going to use that utility pass to make the edge wrap tool. So as you can see, I've sort of turned things off. Let me just turn off the exponential height flow and the sky atmosphere, just so we can kind of see the effect of this, because we want something bright behind him. So I've just added a sphere. So I'm going to add a sphere, and then ideally, if this was photographic, we get some of that light wrapping round onto him. And to do that, let's go and create the media texture first. So we've got our media player here for this plate, and now I need to make another media player and a media texture for the utility pass. Right mouse button, going in to make another media player, and I'm going to click yes for the media output texture asset, like that. So we're going to say media player utility, and then media player utility video. I like to change the name F2 to media texture utility. So now we're going to add those into the sequencer in the same way. I'm going to go to my first frame, which is actually 0, and I can type it in here. And the reason why there's a gap here is because my camera track started at frame 108, and I didn't want to track from 0. So I'm going into the add, clicking add, media track. So I'm adding another media track. Press plus, because I'm adding a media source. And then here's our utility. So that's our utility pass, and now we have to pipe that by right mouse button, properties, and then put that into our media texture, and we set that to our utility. So there we are, then come out of that. So now when I go into my master material, we're going to add that utility part in, and then blend over a magic node that will blur everything. Okay. So here we are, here's our extraction. And then I'm just going to make this bigger, and I probably over here, so I'm going to keep this over here like that. Now my world was set to blend mode was translucent, and you can see down here I can switch it to the masked. And the great thing is that, you know, masks, there's lots of advantages which I go on about on my other video. But one of the things I always do is just pipe off here and put dithered temporal AA, and that takes your masked, at the moment it's like binary, on or off, pixel or no pixel, and then this one, what it does is it does the same thing, because that's how masked works, but it dithers the fades. So if you've got a gradation, it'll have more dots where it's thicker and less dots spaced out when it's thinner. There we are. So that I just always add that one. So I'm going to go and park on a different frame. So 1 second. I'm going to switch him back to translucent. So now we're going to recreate the kind of thing that we were doing inside of DaVinci when I was explaining how edge wrap works. So we have the background, which we need to blur, and then we have our edge, which we need to use as an alpha of that blurred background, and we put that over our plate. So the first thing I'm going to do is just bring in that utility pass. So I'm going to, let's move it over here. There's our utility, so I'm going to bring him in, and then you can see him there. And then what we're going to do is add that on top of our texture sample. So that's our color, and I want to add this on top of there. I'm just going to make a bit of space. So add that on there. So I'm going to use an add node, and then adding that on top of our color. Change that input, and now we all have a bright, cool edge. There we are, done. Beautiful. All right, so we don't really want that. We're going to use this as the alpha to multiply this background. So how do you blur the background? And that was something that I was kind of stuck with until I got out my favorite asset, which was dun, 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 this is your hook. This is your hook moment. It was the scene capture 2D asset thing again. Huh? What? Yeah, so what I'm going to do is basically duplicate the camera and put a scene capture 2D there to recreate that view, and then we can pipe that in to a render texture. And so we're going to add a render texture here and multiply that by that, add that on top, bish bosh bash, job done. All right, so we're going to create a scene capture 2D. So we go into the little quickly add to project plus box button, and then I'm going to type in scene capture 2D, add him in, and then I can't see him at the moment because I need to press G so we can see that guy. Let's bring him forward like that. So again, it's a camera that we're going to put exactly on the same position as our camera. So there's my camera there. No, there's my scene capture 2D. I'm going to parent that to my FBX camera, and I'm going to just reset all the transformations. So I'm hoping he is exactly aligned. Let me come out of here so we can zoom around and see our camera. Where is our camera? Okay, yeah. So he's massive too, because of my scale, because I'm basically scaling everything gigantically. My camera is scaled like hugely, huge. Right, so I wonder if I can scale that down a bit. Let's have a look. Now that's going to change my scale, isn't it? So I don't want to change that. That'll move him down. Can I change the size? Oh, I can change the size of that. There we go. I don't think it makes any difference to the view, but I'm just going to put him like that because it just makes it a bit easier to understand. And now I'm hoping that this scene capture 2D will go along here. So he's following my camera, which is invisibles, because I deleted the mesh. Okay, so we want to see the result of this, and we feed this scene capture 2D into a texture target. But to make a texture target, you have to make a render target. Right mouse button, texture, and then render target. So I call that RT, but why is it not called texture target? RT, no, what are we calling this one? Blur. we're calling this blurry. No, blur, because I can't spell blurry. All right, so that is our render target, and we put that into our texture target. So now that should update. There we are. Did you see that? That image became the view. So we'll take this scene capture 2D asset, needs a texture target, which is this thing, and then it sends that picture to the texture to the render target. So we go back into our master material, and now we're going to feed this render target into here. So there's our render target, and we're going to multiply this by that. Well, I can do the red, green, blue, or alpha depending on how wide we want it, but I'm just going to add a multiply node, and then let's feed in the alpha, and then we should see now the edge. So there we are. So what we've got here now is a difference in size. So what I need to do is basically match these two. So we've got our render target, and you can sort of see here. Let me change that one. So we've got our image of me, like this thing, is projected on top of this render here, on top of this image. So we need to match this to that, because this lines up perfectly with our character, but that doesn't. So, right. So if I just plug this one into here like that, you'll see this lines up, but this one doesn't. So I need to kind of effectively change the aspect ratio of this image and the field of view to match this, and that is a little bit trial and error. So I'm going to show you how I do that. Put you in there. No, there we are. Hit apply. Okay. And one thing that I do, one way that I do this is to turn off the alpha and make it like semi-transparent. So I'm going to go back into the extraction again. So at the moment it's using this alpha, and I'm going to just add in number 1. So that'll give me a solid alpha. Press 1, and then I'm going to add these together. So I'm just going to do an add node, and add that into there, and then put that into my opacity, and it should be solid now. And I'm going to just mix it off a bit, 0.7. Apply. So now that plate will show you what I'm projecting onto it. So let's go back into this sequencer, and you can kind of see here now, like there's that ball, there's the top of the shoulder, there's the feet. So it's this area, you know, outside of this frustrum, I think they call that. And you can see the top of my head, it's a bit blurry there. So what we're going to do is go into our texture target. So I'm going to double click on that, and then try and match that aspect ratio, size, and the field of view of the render target, the scene capture 2D card. It's pretty complicated, isn't it? Hey, all right, never mind. So I'm going to change this to 1920. This is the size of my image by 1080. So this should match now. So there we go. So they do match, and that looks good so far. And I'm just going to change my field of view, so you can see there that my projection is projecting on top of him, like that, and the default must match that aspect ratio, which is good to know. So field of view of 90 seems to line up. The reason why we're getting these little dots and white lines is because I've got a divide on that, and then I'm adding it on top of a transparent thing. So don't worry about that. That'll go once we get rid of this semi-transparent thing. I just needed that to kind of line up and make sure everything looked good. So what I'm going to do is just go into there and turn that off. So let's go back into here now, and then I don't need that anymore, so I'm just going to pipe that into there, into that opacity, and then there's our character. Now if you get an error, sometimes this will be grayed out or redded out, And I think it's because it was some type, yeah, if it's set to color, which it kind of defaults to, it changes to linear color. And I think it's because I'm doing a multiply with this one is linear color, because EXR is a linear color space rather than tone mapped, whatever it is, display space thing. Oh, don't get me into color spaces and stuff. Anyway, change that one, linear color from color to linear color. All right, if that happens to you, which sometimes it does. And it did this time. All right, so I can get rid of that. So let me just delete that, makes that cleaner. So now, and I hit, apply. That. So effectively, the Scene Capture 2D is a camera, and it's taking that feed into that render texture, which is then using in the material. The default of the actual Scene Capture 2D is kind of for speed, and so it doesn't have all the extra bells and whistles of making it like out of focus. So we want to make this camera out of focus, and to do that we have to change it from the default render mode, which default capture source, and it's a Scene Capture HDR, that one there. Scene Capture HDR in RGB A in opacity in A. We have to make it into final color HDR in linear working color space, and as soon as I press that, you'll see something change like that. You see it kind of got a little bit brighter everywhere because it's adding the same image on top of itself. And if I open up the actual render target, so it's that image is 100% still in focus. I mean, it's a small, I can make this half the size as well. Let's just divide that by 2 and divide this one by 2 because it's going to be faster to process. So it's kind of adding this on top of itself. And then I look for focal distance of the Scene Capture 2D, and we turn on this one, depth of field. And you don't see anything there at the moment, but if you make it 0, it kind of defaults to 1, then, oh, look at this. You see, it started blooming all of this on there. So if I make it solid, like it's now everything's sharp, you're not getting any bloom, but if you go this way, now we're getting bloom over that bright area. So then we hit save that. And that's kind of set up. Effectively, what I'm going to do is go inside the material and make a little variable that'll expose the brightness value that we can then edit in the sequencer. But for now, if I just grab this sphere and move it around, you can see that it's like brightening up that edge. So if I just play this, you can see that edge wrap is working. It's working. It's maybe a little heavy, but we'll go in and give you a variable that will change that in the sequencer. So I'm going to add another sphere here. So here we go. This one is got a different color on it. So it's taking that color and it's wrapping it around. So if you've got something hot here, and you're going to get that color coming around the edge. So let's dial this to taste and go into the content browser, into the master material. And then I am going to add a variable. What's the word? Let's find out what the word is. I'm going to press 1. And then what's this called? Convert to parameter, that was it. So I'm going to add a parameter called edge wrap, or light wrap as some people call it. I call it edge wrap. And then I'm going to multiply that by that value. So M for multiply, we can drag off here, and then put your edge wrap into there, and then that into there. And then we don't have to go into a material instance. I could just, go into here and type 0.4, enter, then press apply, and it will change the value of this. And I can go in there, 0.2, and you might want to do that. Or what you can do is, since this is a parameter, if I add a material instance, I'll be able to edit that as a material instance. Or I can, yes, save that. Or I'm just going to try this now. I don't know if it's possible, but I'm without a material instance. If I bring this plate into the sequencer, and then I hit plus for a static mesh component, and then see if I can get the material component, material slot, material parameters. Then I can go into here, and then the one I just made, did I give it a name? So look, edge wrap, yeah, so edge wrap. And if I go into there, on there's my value, so I can change that directly in here, so I don't actually have to go into the material instance. That's new to me. I was not aware of that. This is great. So look, you can just change the value there and kind of go, that feels like a better value for the edge wrap. And so, yeah, hey, get off. So as he's going over those specific things, we're getting some of that, it feels like there's some glow coming from that onto the character. And while I'm here, I'm going to show you go into that master material. We go to our utility path, and the moment he's using the alpha value, which was the broadest, and then I'm going to change it now to the red. So that should change this when I hit apply. There we go. So it's kind of made it a little smaller, and then I can change it to the green, apply that one. And then the blue, just for a little tiny bit of edge. So you kind of like dial it to taste in your scene. And then what we could do is put a lerp between these and then mix from one to another. So you could animate it in the sequencer. But that'll be for another day. You just drag one of these out and type lerp. All right, lerp. And then go linear interpolate, and then we could say mix between 1 and B, that one there. Pipe that into there. Press 1, make another parameter. I call this one convert to parameter. Call this width, edge, width. Hit OK. Apply that. So this is doing, what's it doing? It's doing a mix between those two. So if I now go into the sequencer and go into our material slot Lambert, there should be one now called edge. What did I call it? Key, edge or something. Edge width, like that. And it's 0. Let's see what happens if I move the 2. Look at that. So you can kind of change going from one to the other. So let's change the B because it's quite harder to see. Let's change it from alpha is in B, and we'll make it the green one. So this should kind of show us a little bit more obvious. So we go for a strong one to a less strong one. There we go. So that's a strong to less strong. So it's like the width is changing. Great. So I am now going to take this and clean it up and just put him in a little environment and kind of do my intro. So I will just start on that now. I bought an asset recently. I bought a few of them. There was a sale on the Fab store. It was some Cyberpunk kind of things. It was inspired because I did that awful AI kind of thing, and I was like, actually, that would be quite fun to just grab a Cyberpunk type environment, put me in it. So let's see what happens, and then I'll play it at the beginning and at the end. All right, but there's your that's how you do your edge wrap. So yeah, more fun. Edge wrap. Woo! So I had a play, and this is a recap of what I did. And like I said, Fab had a sale on, so I bought the big, medium, small Cyberpunk bundle. Woohoo! And it's awesome. And so I am going to show you what I did. So here's the little bundle. I'm going to just move that over there. So I took the world. Let me turn off this. So I got our existing world that we had before. Of me in the environment, and here's another view of it from the side. So there's my camera, and it's moving around with the plate. Very good. And then one thing I also did was I took my camera. So there's that was the FBX camera that we're looking through before. And then I basically parented a cine camera on top of that, because with a cine camera you can do depth of field and some other bells and whistles and stuff like that. And the other advantage of the having a second camera, wherever you are, let me find it. Here it is. So there's my FBX camera. Let me find it. So here's the actual camera. And then actually, there's the camera, and then on top of that camera, I added another camera. So they're on the same, basically along that same vector. Along that same vector from the eye to, like, the camera's pointing this way. So if you add another camera onto that as a child, and you can push it forward and backwards, it will still work with all the tracking and all that sort of stuff. So that's fantastic. That's what I did with this camera, and then I pushed it back along that plane. And so if you push it back along that plane, and when the camera moves, it's going to jump because I've got an animation there, but you can kind of see here actually animating that and moving it forward at the beginning of the shot. So you can go wider and further back, and then you can zoom in. Well, not a zoom, but an actual track in. So you can track along that axis. And then what you can also do is you can track along that axis, but you can also pan and tilt along that axis too. And then all of this will still work, because you can see here, like, I've got the edge wrap working, and there it is there. But if I just move over, you can see it's actually stuck on that image, because it's taking this, which is the scene capture 2D camera thing, and then it's reprojecting from that same view. So as long as these two are lined up, if I just undo that, so you can see they're in the same world, and they'll line up, and it'll kind of sell that illusion that you're getting that edge wrap. So that's what I did there. And another thing that I did with that scene capture 2D is you can actually hide certain objects from the render. Let me find my actual texture. I'm going to put you over here. So at the moment, it's in that same position as the camera, but we can only see these background objects and not the character. So you can actually turn those things off. So if I go into, it's all over the place. If I go into here, you've got hidden actors. You've got an option for hidden actors. So under Scene Capture 2D, hidden actors, and you see I've turned off the plate and the floor. And if I just delete this, you see, so it's actually, that's what I was hiding from this view. So if I go back into here now, it'll kind of give a different result. And it's not that easy to tell on this one, but basically what you can do is you go into here, and you go into hidden actors, you add there, use the plus button, and then you go where it says none, you add your plate, and see it's made him disappear. And I'm going to add another one for the ground, for that floor. There it is. So that should disappear. And now it will look the same to everyone else, but to me, I can see the difference. And it's a magnificent difference. Okay, so then I went into the levels, and I bought that Cyberpunk environment and put him in it. So if I just come out of here, and I'll turn off the camera, we'll just pilot this camera around just to see this amazing environment. It's just fantastic. So that's why I love compositing in real time in Unreal Engine, because you can do stuff like this, and it really just feels like you're playing as a kid with your action figures. And so I love it, and you get to make movies with yourself in. Brilliant. All right, well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. And for those hardcore members who want to know all about their camera tracking and all of that sort of stuff, and how I did that in DaVinci Resolve and slightly improved my process, then that bonus section is coming up right now. So before we cut to the bonus section, I'm just going to show you the complete opening video of this without anything on top of it and me talking or anything like that, just so you can kind of have a look and see where we ended up. All right, thanks again. Bye. With visual effects compositing, one of the tricks we use to integrate a blue screen or green screen into an environment is a thing called edge wrap. Now, edge wrap basically takes that background, it blurs it, it pulls some of that color a little bit over your extraction, and just helps it sit into the plate a little bit better. But until now, we've had to do that in post-production. So you do that in After Effects or Fusion or Nuke or something like that. But since I'm doing offline virtual production, I like to pre-extract my blue screen, green screen, and then put that on a media texture inside of Unreal Engine, so you can see it into the environment, you get all the advantages like fog and all those sort of things. It's brilliant. But one thing that I've not been able to do is edge wrap. But now I've got a way of doing it, and I'm going to show you how to do that in this video, so you can put it in your films. Okay, so those that have stayed for the bonus section on the camera track, this bit's for you. So I'm going to show you how I camera tracked this in the future, past, wherever I am. Confuse myself. So we've got our plate. Here we go. Our green screen plate, and there it is. There's our shot, and you can see that I've added some extra little reference markers on the wall, and those were just like Velcro. So I've got white Velcro because that's my screen, and I put some black bits on it, and I put some white Velcro on these things. So I just made it gave it a few more tracking markers around the spot, around the plate, so to help the camera tracker. So that's good. And then you can see nice, look at that nice long move. Whee! And then I'll probably cut to a little insert of the camera tracker. And then on the last video I said, oh, it's just a little camera. And it's like, no, you were right. It's not a little camera. It's quite heavy. It's about 10 pound of camera for the Ursa Mini. But coming from the olden days when cameras were like this big, it's little-ish. All right. Okay, so back to this shot. So we've got our plate, and then we've got our extraction here. And then what I'm going to do is use a clean plate node to basically punch this guy out, punch him. And we basically, this is a default, and then you take the matte, and then you just use this grow edges inside of the clean plate. So you just use grow edges, and it'll remove him. And then see here, it's just picking up a little bit of that arm. So I'm going to add a blur node, and just make that, expand that a little bit. So it'll just grow that clean plate where it's referencing, where it's pulling the color from. And then to get rid of the line, I just add a blur node on top of that using that same matte. And the goal of this is just to make the plate clean so that it's only looking at the things that aren't moving. So the things that are solid in the world. So then it'll make it easier to do the track. So there we go. And so it'll basically ignore this fella in the middle and just look at all these markers around the room. So then we go into the camera track node. So we add the camera track node. And then you've got here, this is the two to pull around here. So if I go into, just going to reset these to their default. So we come in, and these are their default settings, and I'm going to enable preview auto track locations. And so that'll look at your frame and just look at high kind of contrast areas where it can kind of easily track something. And then you change your direction threshold and your minimum feature separation, and the lower that gets, the more points it'll try and read. But if you make it too high, it'll still track, but when you try and process it, it'll just like hang forever, or it's just got too many calculations that I just can't wait for a week for it to track. So if it takes too long, then change these numbers, bring these down. So I'm going to just say that's a good number. And I'm zooming out a little bit. And then you hit auto track, and then you hit auto track, and then it'll just cook away. And then in a minute or two, it'll go zoom, 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 zoom. And then I've got bi-directional tracking on, so it'll go all the way along here, and then all the way back like that. So that's great. Okay, we'll wait for that to do that. Okay, and it's done. All right, so there is our track. And now what we do is we go into the camera solve. Let's look at the camera itself. It's an 11mm lens, which I set that myself, and I changed the film gate to the Ursa, which is what I shot with, and that will be different on your camera. And then I go to solve, and I think I hit clean tracks by filter, so I'm going to press that button, and then I think it flags these as not liking them or something. Track error on that one. 1 point, no idea. Okay, and then I hit solve, and then I wait and I wait and I wait, and then if this doesn't work, it's because your points were too close together and on the track part, so it takes forever sometimes. But hopefully, if it doesn't work after the first 30 seconds or something like that, you might have an issue. But otherwise, hooray, it's working. So you sit back and relax while it does its magic. So that's done, and then you can see you've got keys everywhere. and it looks like these points are kind of in the right spot. They seem to be, it feels good. So if I was doing this with, say, a set extension, so the plate, I need the edge of the frame to be like bang on with the actual camera track, then I would have to have a lens distortion either applied to the renders, or you underdistort the plate so that everything is totally rectilinear, like a computer. It only draws like there's 2 points between the top of the line and the bottom of the line. It's like a straight vector, whereas in a real camera it kind of bows and bends depending on the lens itself. So if you want bang on absolute accuracy, then you would add a lens distortion or an underdistort to the plate first or afterwards, but in my case I only kind of care about what's in the middle of the frame, because that's where my characters walk in, and I got a bigger fish to fry. So now we've got our camera track done. We want to make it into a 3D camera track. So at the moment, this is all the camera tracking kind of 2D sort of calculations and stuff. And basically what we do now is export this to the solve. So you go to solve, and then you go to export, and then you hit export here, and it will give you some things. And it always seems to put it like over here or somewhere. Watch this. Look, so there's my camera. Hit export. And it makes a little group of nodes. And there you go. It's put it over there. Don't know why, but that's the way it is. Okay, so we've got our 3D camera here, a point cloud, a ground plane, merge 3D, and the camera tracker renderer. So if I click on the merge 3D and just drag this into that main window, it'll now pop to the 3D world. There we are. And I'm using the middle mouse to scroll and zoom in. So there's our camera and our camera track, and it's made it very, very small. So I'm going to scale it all up. But there's our markers that we used, and then you can see these are just markers. They're not moving, there's no animation on them, and yet when we look through the 3D view, and you'll see, oh, actually I can't render those at the moment, so we need to make those renderable. So we go to the point cloud and we click make renderable, and then it'll actually render them through the renderer. So we've got our 3D world, and then that 3D world is rendered into a 2D scan line, effectively. So now if we move around, those tracking markers look like they're pretty much locked to the points, but you probably get a little bit of drift towards the edges and things like that, but it's good enough for me. Okay, now what I do is I've got my camera, my point cloud, my ground plane, and then I move to align the camera, I transform the camera and I transform the point cloud, but I leave the ground plane where it is, because I'm going to go back into 3D. The ground plane wants to be on the ground, and at the moment it's kind of putting it in the middle of the frame, and it's this one here. Let me see if I can make it a little bit clearer by clicking on the ground plane, going into the material, and then I'm just going to change my alpha so it's nearly solid, and it kind of makes it show up a little bit better. So like that. So that is really where I want my world to be. So I want to, instead of moving the camera, well, I'm going to move the camera up, and I'm going to move the point cloud up at the same time. So to move them both, I'm going to add a transform node. So we have to control space, transform 3D. Like that. So add in that. Okay, and that will let me move the camera, but I want this point cloud to go with it. So I copy the camera, right mouse button, copy, and then click in the background window and right mouse button, paste instance. So that is a clone of that node, and I'm going to apply that to the point cloud by holding down shift, and then the noodle will change. So whatever move I apply to this thing now, I can move it here in the Z. No, Z it's up. No, Z's the other way. Y is up in this case. So I'm moving my camera and the point cloud up, and if I orbit around here, you can see that the ground is staying at 0. So I want to align my world to that. There's like a fancy thing in the camera tracker that you can go into the camera tracker and you can change this to unaligned and aligned, and you select some points and all that sort of stuff, and it kind of aligns it. But I've just found this so much easier because I like to have absolute control over it. And so now the other thing as well is you can orientate this, because if I look at the bottom of here, you can see there's a diagonal here. That's basically where my ground is because my camera is up and then tilted down. So I'm just going to go into these little nodes up here so I can actually just grab, there's a transform node and there's a rotation node. I can grab those and then orient it around so that it's feels like it's level, and then I bring it down like that, and then I'll move you in the Z a little bit. Ooh, and I like to get my focal point which it looks like it's there, that little red bit, that's where I'm orbiting around like that, aligned to pretty much my center of my world. Just makes it easier. So that's where my character will be standing. That was me and the plate. So I'm just going to bring this around like that, and I'm going to come down a little bit in the Y, like that. So that feels like, these were the light stands, and they feel like they should be vertical, but maybe they're not quite. Let me give it a bit more of a rotation. Way, let's feel like that. There you go. Let's go and get it to the edge of the screen. Okay. All right, that feels a bit better. Okay, and then we can adjust this inside of Unreal. And I'll show you how I do that, but I just like to get it ballparky. Great. So there is my camera oriented how I want it, and then you can see that's moving along now, doing its animation. Beautiful. Okay, now the other difference that I did from last time is I changed the scale of the world, and I do it in the Merge 3D node. So when you come to export this with the FBX, there's a scale option in there, but no matter what I was doing, it was always coming in pretty much the same, or just it was all over the place. But anyway, Merge 3D, if you go into that, transform in there, this is the scale to adjust. And then I found for Unreal a scale of around 50 basically made it feel about right in the engine. And it's never going to be perfect because we don't know, we haven't told the camera like what the size of these dots are, how far away it is from the world. There's probably a way of doing all of that in the actual camera, the camera node itself, but I don't know. So it's a wing it and see kind of thing, very technical. So at this point, what you do is you export this as an FBX. So if we go to space and control and type FB export, that one there, FBX exporter, add that. So I'm going to put it into there, and I'm going to give it a name. What is this one? Edge wrap. Edge dot FBX. Hit save on that. So now that is connected to this, and I don't want it connected to that one. But the important thing is make sure it is connected to the Merge 3D node. Okay, so you've got that in there. I click on render range, so it'll render out all of this stuff. And then when you're ready to do it, you hit fusion and then render or savers. But make sure all your other savers are off in the scene, because otherwise it'll render everything. So you basically make sure that is the only saver, because it's effectively a saver, it's saving something out. But make sure everything else is off. And then what I would do before I go to that point is, currently if I did that FBX export, and it renders out geometry, lights, cameras, all those sort of things, but it's not rendering out these point clouds. So what I would need to do is to convert this point cloud into a form of geometry. And then I learnt this from Profitless, is his channel. And so go and subscribe right now, because he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to cameras and fusion and things like that. So thank you. I think his name's Brian. Thank you, Brian. And so I'm going to copy what he did. And basically he added a shape. So the first thing is you make a shape. So space, control space, and type in shape. Shape 3D. There we are. Oops, I'm not merging that. So I've got a shape here, and defaults to a plane. I'm just going to make it quite small. So 0.0. Oh, that wasn't a point. 0.02, like that. So I've got a little plane here. And then he used a thing called replicate 3D. So you click on your point cloud, control spacebar, replicate 3D, hit add to that, and then you feed this shape into the foreground, and then you put that into your transform like that. And then hopefully, if I go into here, now we've got a plane for every single point on that point cloud. And the thing to do is to make your shape much smaller. So make that 0.1, say. So now they're a bit smaller, but you can see it actually makes a point, one of these for every single point on those trackers. So what you do is you go into your point cloud and change that from a cross to a point. Like that. So now it's only got one per point. So now it's putting a piece of geometry there. And I'm just going to use the plane because it doesn't really matter what you've got. And what I would love to be able to do is merge these together as one piece of geometry. I think in Nuke there's some sort of merge 3D node. Not this merge 3D. Each one will still be separate. I want something that basically fuse all these points together. So if you're a fusion person and you know how to fuse all of the result of this replicate into one piece of geometry, please let me know in the comments, because that would save me a bit of a pain, because when you bring this FBX into Unreal Engine, it brings in a single object for every single one of these planes. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit annoying, but I'll take it for now. Okay, so we've got our Merge 3D now with our camera and our shape for each of those points. Now we can export it. So if we go into our FBX exporter, we've got a directory, we've set it to render range, and then we hit fusion. Oh, it's turned grey. Okay, so if this happens to you, and it's saying that the render all savers is grayed out, what you can do, and again this is thanks to Profitless, control spacebar, add another saver, okay, like that, and then control P just to disable it, and then when I go back into render all savers, it ungrays it out. So thanks again, Brian, you're awesome. Okay, and then hit render all savers, and now wait for it to write out those FBX files, and come back in a minute. So great, that's done. So now I have my camera track as an FBX, and that is exported to the disk. And the next thing I'm going to do is now go into Unreal Engine and bring that in and line it all up. This is where I left everyone else, but you hardcorers, you're going to be thrilled to bits with this part. So I have my plate, fantastic. So what I'm going to do now, so we're bringing the FBX into the actual level, and then we bring the camera into the sequencer. So I have to bring it in through this one, not you have to go file, import into level. So it's not file import, you go file import into level, because it reacts differently. And then I'm going to go into where I put it, which was in here, the FBX. So we hit that button. And so we put it into a level. So I'm going to go into my level, and I made one called camera, and I'm going to hit OK. So it's going to give you some options here. So if I open this up, if you look at the root node, there's all those shapes. So we had the ground plane, and then all these like individual those little squares that we used as the reference, and that's why I wanted to try and merge them all together. And it also brings in like the camera and a camera skeleton, but we don't use those. We use the ones that we bring in through the sequencer. Okay, one of the annoying things it does is it makes a material for every single one of those little squares. So I turn that off by going to the asset name and then clicking it again, and it turns off. So it's not going to make a material for all of those. So that speeds it up a little bit. So if you go back to the scene, I changed the hierarchy type from create one blueprint asset to create level actor. So it's going to put all these little shapes into here, but never mind. And then I just move into a directory, but I'll show you that. So then we hit import like that. So hit import, and here it is. It's making, so there's 2,000 of those little squares. So what fun. But they're all small, but still, it would be nice to have just one object. And it will put them all into like the content browser. There'll be like tons of them. Boo! There we are. So you've got all those things like that. Now where are they? Let's have a look. Here they are. They're over here. So there are all our tracking little references, our squares, and our camera, but we're not going to use that camera, but at least you can see it now. So that's where we're going to put our plane and our camera and all those sort of things. So that's awesome. Okay, so now what we do, I'm going to grab plane. Let's grab all these shapes. I like to grab them all and then just right mouse button, and let's just move them to a level. So I'm going to go move to create new level. No, a folder, sorry, make a new folder, and then I'm just going to call them ref like that. So you can turn them on and off. There we go. Turn them on and off if you want to. And so now we're going to go to the sequencer, and we're going to bring our camera in through here. So going to go to the start frame. I don't think it makes any difference, but use this one here, the little wrench, and then you import that same FBX into there, and that will bring that FBX into the sequencer, but it doesn't bring any of the geometry in. So I just leave it all as default, press OK, and then it will bring that camera into here. So, and oh, I think I started a little bit later, didn't I? So there we go. So there's our camera, and it's moving in that environment. Ooh, let's have a look. Now, let's take this plane. That was our plane that we had with the actor on it. And then I'm going to find this camera. I'm going to give it a name. So this is going to be my FBX camera, because I won't be shooting through, I won't be looking through this camera lens. I will add another camera on top of this that I can then push, pull, and it'll be a cine camera actor, because this one isn't a cine camera actor. I'm just going to change the field of view because that doesn't make any difference, just to go a bit wider. Now I'm going to grab my plane, and I'm just going to parent it onto that one. Oh, it won't let me because it is a static mobility. Change that to movable. Grab that plane, attach it to that camera. And I'm just going to reset all of these, except for my rotation, which I need to set to 90 by 90. And then I need to... What? Why am I not seeing it? Let's come out of here. I'm just going to let go of that one. Where? Oh, there he is. That's why. Because he is right on the camera plane. That's why I couldn't see it. So what I need to do is push this further back, and I push it back to where that the actor was standing, which is around about here. I was in between all of this stuff. So let me take this plate and just push it back, whoop, like that, and it is relative to that camera. So if I move this, it should be moving. And where is my camera? Oh, my camera's huge again. It's done that thing where it makes it massive. There it is. So look at that. And that's because I'm scaling it after the, you know, in the DaVinci, it's like you've got your camera there, and then I have that merge 3D node, and I scale it by 50. So it's kind of scaling the actual icon itself. So I don't know how to make it smaller in here, but the only thing I do is just delete the mesh. So if you grab the camera itself and you search for mesh, then that's the mesh it's using. I suppose I could make a tiny version of this model, put a little tiny thing in there, but if you just open that up, and I can just hit clear, and it just gets rid of it. That's the easier way. And then there it is. Okay, so there's my camera. I think it gives you the axis for it. So you see these cameras. Oops, get off. You see those cameras. Those are the ones that came in when I brought it into the content browser. So we don't use those. And so I just delete them. So hit delete, backspace, backspace, and they're deleted. Another thing you can also do is render out the plate with those tracking markers. You know where I changed it to make renderable? You can actually just render out a little video of that, again, as a reference just to see where these points are, if it's lining up properly. But I can't be bothered for now because I'm that professional. So I'm just going to look back through the camera lens. So here we are. Huge, huge. Going to make him go back into my plane. I think I reset the scale, so let's just go back into my scale and make it 1.92 1920 by 1.08. Then change that to ganged So I can just scale it all down like this, and I'm just going to put it about here. So turn him off like that. So he should be pretty much in the middle of these where the lights were and stuff like that. So I'm just going to push him a little bit further back. I want to do it manually, but he is set currently to world space. So that transform, if I move it, he's going to be moving him that way rather than away in a vector from the camera in that same alignment. So now I've changed it to a local mode. So now, you know, our camera's over here, up there. So it needs to be in line with that. So make sure that it's not on world, it's on local. That way you can move this to pretty much where the character was. And I think that's about right. And now what you can do is if you... Why is that moving like that? So you should feel like he's standing in the right spot. Like when it's... Because the camera's moving and he's moving, but when you look at it not from the camera, it should feel like he's not sliding around. Okay, one thing I'm going to do now, just to help me find out where his sweet spot is from distance from the camera, is I'm going to go into his material and then change the material in here to, if you look for depth, see this disable depth test? If you turn that on, it basically disables it. And you hit apply. So now he won't, he will always be on top of whatever's behind him. So there is no depth on there, which is great for in this case because you can get him in the right 3D space. But if you want to put things in front of him, then you have to come up with other tricks, which I did on my last video. But we'll come to that problem in a minute. All right, so let's kind of, I'm just going to find that sweet spot. So I'm going backwards and forwards. So his feet. So he's still sliding around a bit. Let's bring him forward. At some point, you'll feel like he's locked. Oh, there you go. It feels a bit better there. Oh, that's pretty good. Let's go and grab him again. And one thing is your playback, it will be slightly out of sync in the viewport. You know, you can see that it goes all blurry and ugly looking, besides his general beauty. But that actually feels pretty good. Okay, and then now let's bring this character forward because I never actually checked with that mannequin if he was the same scale, so it's probably going to be too big or too small. Okay, yeah, so what I can do, right, so now we're at the point with my camera is working. It feels like it's working. He feels like he's locked to the ground. Nice. That's good. But now he's a bit too small. So what I do is I parent these things together. So what I'm going to show you now is how I get around that. So I'm going to go and add just an actor, which is a basic actor. So it's a blank little actor. And I am going to set that to here. So let's just set it to somewhere that's kind of close to him. I'm going to come off this camera. Let's set him up to about here. Let's say that's pretty much, I'm going to put it around about here, where he's standing. There you go. That would make sense. Okay. So I'm going to set him there, and then I'm going to parent this camera to that actor and the plane. So if I take this actor now, I can scale this up. And him, oh, actually another thing, what I should do is actually take all those points and parent them to this actor as well. I can do that, but it's going to be a bit of a pain because you can have like 5,000 objects. But we'll ignore it for now. So let's just hide the reference. Because that reference is good to kind of know it's tracking, and what you can do is use the plate and kind of go, oh, that looks about right, but whatever. All right, so I've got the actor, and I'm just scaling that up so that he feels about the same scale through this window here. So let's go to my view, and then I can just scale this up. So he's really small, like that, or he's really big. So let's go to about there, hit play. There you are. Feels about the right sort of scale in that world. And awesome. So while we're here, I want to do one more thing, and that is when I grab this character here and put him in front of myself, he in the 3D world, he's in the right 3D space, but because I've disabled depth test, he's always going to be projected in front of him. So I want to re-enable depth test, but the trouble is if I re-enable the depth test button, his feet will intersect the ground. So what I'm going to do is just scale him closer to the camera. So he'll be relatively the same in world space, in screen space, but in world space he'll be closer. I'm just going to show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take my actor, go into my media, my master material, and then disable depth test. So depth test. I'm just going to move it up here. So if I hit disable depth test, so now it's not disabled, and then hit apply, you see like his feet are intersecting the ground. And then I'm just going to open up another window. So I go to window, viewport, click on viewports. So this is the same scene but from a different angle. There it is. So in world space you see right here, I'm going to hit G just to hide everything, and then come over here. So you see there he is, there's his plane, and he's intersecting the ground. But what we can do to fix that is if we select the camera in the sequencer, and let's put you over there. I'll have to duck because I'm probably got me here. I'll be like that. If I go now into my camera, and you see the scale, it's set to 50 because that's what we scaled our world by. And you see, if I open up the transform, it's got scales already. So I'm just going to delete that scale there and come back to my first frame. Let's go and find where he intersects. So he's intersecting right here. So what I can do is just take my scale and then scale it. And you can see in the side window here that he's actually getting closer to the camera. So let's just pull that like that. So I've got selected the camera and changing the scale. So as he's getting closer to the camera, he's getting smaller. So that relationship to the size he is in screen and where he is relative in world space is sort of the same. Well, it's not, isn't it? So so the screen space is the same, but his world space is getting closer and smaller to the camera, which is great. So now he's not intersecting the ground, which is really good. So if I put him back here, and so say at this point we wanted him here, and then if I select my character, my mannequin, I can grab my mannequin and then move him in 3D space, and now he's in front of him. So I have to scale him a bit here to make him smaller. So we're going to our camera, pull that smaller so he's a bit closer. He's just on like that, but he's right close to that guy, so it's a bit of a balance. But what you can do is just save a key. I can save a key here like that, and then you can see in the viewport it's got a key there. So I can delete that frame, and then he comes forward like that. There he is like that, and I can make him push him back now. So I can scale him up again. Whoa, wrong one. I can select the camera and scale the camera back, and so he looks the same in the world, but you can see here he's in the different screen space, world space. It's all getting a bit spacey. And there we are. So that's how we get around that problem. So now we've got our camera in 3D space, and our character in 3D space, and we can have him not being depth testy, holdy outy thing. There we go. So now I'm going to go back to the video and then carry on the rest of it for those people that did want to sit and watch and figure out and do 3D camera moves and all that sort of business. So now it's at the end of the video for you, and you know what, just thank you for watching, and I'm really enjoying making all these videos, so thanks for all your support and for all your likes and comments and subscribings, so I really appreciate it. And now I have to find another video for you to watch. This one here is really good if you've not seen it. It's one of my favorites. Okay, all right, see you there. Bye.